Sir, you have to walk. Wheelchairs aren't allowed on this road. If you can't, you'll have to come with us.
I'm paralyzed. Please try to
I understand, but I still have to act. Hands, please. Cuffs going on.
March 15th, 2023. Marcus Rivera had faced Taliban fighters, IED explosions, and losing both legs. But he'd never faced anything like ICE agent Sarah Chen walking into his Phoenix law office with handcuffs. "Stand up or you're under arrest for disability fraud," she said. Marcus looked down at his wheelchair, at the prosthetics he hadn't worn in months, at the Purple Heart on his desk. "I can't stand," he said quietly. "Then you're going to jail." What Chen didn't know was that Marcus had a photographic memory. Every face, every voice, every promise broken. And her voice matched the woman who'd laughed on a recorded phone call 15 years ago while his translator's family was being executed in Baghdad. The woman who'd sold them out. The woman who thought a paralyzed veteran couldn't fight back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rivera's fingers gripped the wheels of his chair, knuckles white as Chen's words hung in the air like cordite. The recognition hit him like shrapnel. Her voice carried the same cold satisfaction he'd heard through that grainy recording in 2008, the same laugh that had echoed through his nightmares for 15 years. "You seem confused, Mr. Rivera." Chen stepped closer, her ICE badge catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Or should I say, Mr. Rodriguez? Funny how your citizenship documents have some inconsistencies." The threat landed exactly as she intended. Marcus had been born Marcus Rodriguez in Tucson, adopted by the Riveras when he was 8 after his mother died. The paperwork trail was messy, foster care often was, but his citizenship was legitimate, had been since birth. Chen knew that. This wasn't about citizenship. "My birth certificate is in the filing cabinet," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Along with my adoption papers, Marine Corps service record, and Purple Heart citation. You're welcome to review them." "Fraudulent documents," Chen replied without missing a beat. "We have sources indicating you've been coaching other veterans to fake disabilities for compensation, teaching them how to game the system." She gestured at his wheelchair with disgust. "Like you've been doing." Marcus felt the familiar phantom pain in his missing legs, the kind that always flared when stress spiked. But his mind was racing, calculating. In his peripheral vision, he could see the red recording light on his desk phone. He'd started recording all meetings after too many VA administrators had conveniently forgotten their promises to his clients. Chen was making a mistake she didn't know about yet. "Agent Chen," he said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've never coached anyone to fake anything. My advocacy work involves helping veterans navigate legitimate disability claims that the VA has wrongfully denied." "Is that what you call it?" Chen pulled out a tablet, swiping to what looked like surveillance photos. "These veterans you've been helping, we have evidence they're perfectly capable of working, walking, living normal lives." She turned the screen toward him. Marcus saw grainy photos of Tommy Nguyen, a Navy vet he'd helped file for PTSD benefits after 3 suicide attempts. In the photo, Tommy was standing outside a grocery store, appearing functional. What the photo didn't show was that Tommy had been having a rare good day, the kind that happened maybe twice a month between the panic attacks and dissociative episodes. Marcus knew because Tommy had called him that afternoon, sobbing because he'd managed to buy groceries without a breakdown. "You're cherry-picking moments," Marcus said. "Invisible disabilities don't show up in surveillance photos." Convenient excuse. Chen pocketed the tablet. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide us with files on every veteran you've assisted in the last 5 years. Names, addresses, medical records, financial information, everything. That's protected by attorney-client privilege. Not when you're not actually an attorney." Chen smiled, showing teeth. "Just a fraudulent immigrant coaching other frauds." The recording light blinked steadily. Marcus made a mental note to send copies to his lawyer, the local news, and his contact at the ACLU. But right now, he needed to stay alive long enough to use them, because he was certain Chen recognized him too. The translator's name had been Farid al-Masri, a linguistics professor from Baghdad University who'd risked everything to help Marcus's unit navigate the complexities of working with Iraqi civilians. Farid had a wife, Amira, and 2 young daughters. When the death threats started, Marcus had promised to get them out. The paperwork had taken months, Bureaucratic delays, security clearances, background checks that moved at glacial pace, while the Al-Masri family hid in safe houses that became less safe every day. Then came the phone call Marcus had intercepted. A woman's voice, American accent, giving coordinates to someone on the other end. Coordinates that matched the safe house where the Al-Masris were hiding. 6 hours later, all four were dead. The investigation that followed was a joke. The voice recording was deemed inconclusive. The leak could have come from anywhere. Too many people had access to the safe house locations. Marcus had never forgotten that voice. And now Agent Sarah Chen was standing in his office, threatening him with the same cold precision he'd heard 15 years ago when she'd signed a family's death warrant. "I'll need those files by tomorrow," Chen said, heading for the door. "Or you'll be in federal custody by evening." She paused at the threshold, looking back with something that might have been amusement. "You know, Mr. Rivera, it's funny how the past has a way of catching up with people. Even people who think they're untouchable." Her smile turned predatory. "Even heroes." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the recording light and the absolute certainty that Sarah Chen had just declared war. He reached for his secure phone. Time to call in some favors from his old unit. Time to remember that Marines never left anyone behind, even 15 years too late. Marcus stared at the closed door for 30 seconds before his training kicked in. First rule of contact, secure your position. He wheeled to the window and adjusted the blinds, creating sight lines while blocking direct observation from the parking lot. Chen's black SUV was still there, but she wasn't in it, probably canvassing the building, looking for secondary exits, cataloging his routines. The secure phone felt heavier than it should have as he scrolled to Gunnery Sergeant Jake Morrison's number. Jake ran a private security firm in Scottsdale now, but 15 years ago he'd been Marcus's radio operator, the man who'd helped him intercept that fatal transmission. Rivera? Jesus, it's been, 2 years since the reunion? "Jake, I need you to listen carefully. Sarah Chen, ICE agent, probably operating under false credentials. I need everything you can dig up on her, and I need it yesterday." Silence stretched across the line. Jake had heard that tone before, the one Marcus used when incoming mortars were close enough to rearrange the landscape. "What kind of trouble are you in, Colonel?" The title still felt strange after all these years, but Jake had never stopped using it. "Some habits die hard in the core, the kind that gets families killed," Marcus said. "Remember the Al-Masri situation?" "Fuck," Jake's voice went flat. "I'll make some calls. Stay put and watch your six." Marcus ended the call and wheeled to the filing cabinet, muscle memory guiding his fingers to the hidden compartment behind the bottom drawer. The Glock 19 was still there, along with 2 magazines and the backup hard drive containing copies of all his case files. He'd hoped never to need either again. The phantom pain in his legs intensified as he transferred the gun to the lockbox under his desk. His left thigh, the one that existed only in his nervous system's confused memory, burned like it had in those first months after the IED. Dr. Patel called it psychosomatic stress response. Marcus called it his body's early warning system. He pulled up Tommy Nguyen's file on his computer, reading between the lines of clinical language to remember the man behind the case number. 26 years old, Navy corpsman, 3 tours in Afghanistan. The first suicide attempt had been pills, a cry for help that the VA had answered with a 6-week wait for an appointment. The second attempt had been more serious, rope in a garage. Tommy's neighbor had found him in time. The third attempt had brought Tommy to Marcus's office, shaking and barely coherent, clutching his denial letter like it was a lifeline instead of a death sentence. The VA psychiatrist had written that Tommy's PTSD was situational and would resolve with time. No benefits, no treatment, no help. Marcus had spent 3 hours that day just listening to Tommy talk about the children he'd failed to save in Kandahar, about the guilt that followed him through grocery stores and job interviews, and every quiet moment when his mind had space to remember. It had taken 6 months of appeals, but Tommy now received the treatment he needed, and Chen wanted to destroy that because Tommy had managed to stand upright long enough for a surveillance photo. The office door chimed as Elena Vasquez pushed inside, balancing a coffee tray in her laptop bag. Marcus's assistant was 34, former Army intelligence, and the only person he trusted with the administrative side of his operation. She took one look at his face and set the tray down carefully. "What happened?" "ICE raid. False papers, fraud allegations, deportation threats." Marcus kept his voice level, but Elena knew him well enough to catch the tension underneath. "They want our client files." Elena's expression went cold. She'd grown up in Phoenix, daughter of immigrants who'd fought for citizenship for 20 years before achieving it. The threat of deportation wasn't abstract for her. It was family dinner conversation and childhood nightmares. Legal basis? Fabricated. But that's not the real problem. Marcus hesitated, then decided Elena needed to know what they were facing. The lead agent's voice, I've heard it before. In Iraq, the night the Al-Masri family died. Elena sank into the chair across from his desk. She knew about Iraq, about the translator whose family Marcus had failed to save. It was the wound that had driven him to advocacy work, the guilt that fueled his 12-hour days, and his refusal to turn away veterans the system had abandoned. You're sure? Certain. Marcus touched the recording device on his desk. And I think she recognized me too. The coffee was growing cold, but Elena poured 2 cups anyway. The mundane ritual felt important, an anchor point before everything changed. Outside, Phoenix traffic hummed past in the late afternoon heat, normal people living normal lives, unaware that a war had just started in a strip mall office between a disabled veteran and a government agent with blood on her hands. What do you need? Elena asked. Marcus looked at her, really looked, seeing the loyalty and determination that had made her invaluable over the past 3 years. Elena had a mortgage, a sick mother, a life that could be destroyed by association with whatever was coming. I need you to go home, he said quietly, and stay there until this is over. Elena's laugh was sharp as gunfire. Like hell. The secure phone buzzed against Marcus's desk before Elena could elaborate on her defiance. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in over a decade, one burned into his memory from countless late-night calls during the worst days in Iraq. Marcus stared at the screen, his coffee growing cold in his suddenly nerveless fingers. The number belonged to a satellite phone issued to translators working with American forces. He'd thought all those phones had been deactivated years ago. Answer it, Elena said quietly, reading the shock on his face. Marcus hesitated, then swiped to accept the call. He didn't speak, waiting. Marcus. The voice hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Soft, careful English with the faint accent that had guided his unit through countless conversations with Iraqi civilians. I know she came to see you today. Fareed. The name escaped as barely a whisper. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis, 15 years of guilt and grief reshaping themselves into something he couldn't yet comprehend. You're dead. I saw the bodies. I identified. You saw what she wanted you to see. Fareed al-Masri's voice carried exhaustion that seemed to span decades. We need to meet, tonight. There are things you don't understand about Agent Chen. Elena leaned forward, her intelligence training kicking in as she watched Marcus's face cycle through shock, hope, and growing horror. She mouthed a question, record it? Marcus nodded, hitting the conference button to activate the office recording system. Where have you been? Marcus's voice cracked. 15 years, Fareed. I thought you were all dead. Your wife, your daughters. They are dead. The words carried weight that could crush buildings. Amira, Layla, Yasmin. All dead because of choices I made. Because of what Chen offered and what I was too weak to refuse. The phantom pain in Marcus's legs spiked to white-hot intensity. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, knuckles standing out like mountain ridges against his skin. What are you talking about? She approached me 6 months before the attack, said she had information about threats against my family, that she could protect them if I helped her. Small things at first, information about which interpreters were being considered for American visas, which families were planning to leave Iraq. Marcus's mind raced back to those final months before his unit rotated home. The increasing number of leaks, the way safe houses seemed to become targets within days of being established. He'd blamed the fog of war, the impossible task of securing information in a country where trust was a luxury no one could afford. You were the leak, he said. At first, yes, but then I discovered what Chen was really doing. She wasn't just collecting intelligence, she was running people. Moving them through routes I helped map, taking payment from families desperate to escape. Then Fareed's voice broke, and Marcus heard the sound of a man who'd been carrying unbearable weight for too long. Then killing them and keeping the money, sometimes selling them to militias for bounties. My information wasn't protecting anyone, it was marking them for death. Elena had gone pale, her pen hovering motionless over her notepad. Marcus felt something fundamental breaking apart inside his chest, 15 years of assumed truth crumbling into powder. I tried to stop cooperating, Fareed continued, Told Chen I wouldn't help anymore. That's when she made her position clear. Continue working with her, or my family would become an example to other interpreters who thought they could walk away. So you kept feeding her information. Marcus's voice was hollow. What choice did I have? But I also started documenting everything, recording conversations, copying files, building evidence. I thought if I could gather enough proof, I could take it to your command, expose what she was doing. But she found out. Yes, and she kept her promise. The attack on my family, it was punishment for my betrayal, but also a message to every other interpreter in her network. This is what happens when you cross Agent Chen. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing again the crime scene photos from that night. The tactical precision of the attack, the way it had been designed to look like sectarian violence, while sending a clear message to anyone who understood the context. The bodies I identified, a homeless family she killed for the purpose, burned beyond easy recognition, but similar enough in size and age to pass a cursory investigation. She needed you to believe we were dead, needed the case closed quickly before anyone looked too closely. Where are you now? Marcus asked. Phoenix, Fareed said, and the word landed like a mortar round in the small office. I've been here for 3 years. Chen brought me here as part of her operation. She uses disabled veterans as cover for human trafficking. People trust you, they don't question your activities as much. I've been helping her identify targets, veterans she could frame or coerce into cooperation. Elena dropped her pen. The small sound echoed like thunder in the sudden silence. Marcus felt his old life, the careful equilibrium he'd built around his guilt and his work, disintegrating completely. The man he'd failed to save was alive. The woman who'd killed innocents was operating on his doorstep, and the war he thought he'd left in Iraq had followed him home. Meet me tonight, Fareed said. Warehouse District, Industrial Road 47, midnight. Come alone, or she'll know we're talking. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone like it might explode. Elena broke the silence first. Marcus, my life is over, he said quietly. Everything I've built here, everything I thought I knew, it's all gone. Outside, Phoenix hummed on, oblivious to the fact that 2 ghosts had just begun a conversation 15 years in the making. Marcus stared at the dead phone for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. The weight of Fareed's revelation pressed down on him like the concrete blocks that had fallen on his legs in that Fallujah blast. Sudden, crushing, irreversible. We're not going, Elena said, her voice cutting through the silence with surprising firmness. This is obviously a trap. Is it? Marcus set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. Fareed knew things only he would know. Details about the safe house protocols, the way Chen structured her questions during interrogations. Details that Chen could have fed him. Elena stood up, pacing to the window in short, agitated steps. Marcus, think about this logically. A dead translator mysteriously calls you the same day ICE shows up making threats? That's not coincidence. That's orchestration. Marcus wanted to argue, but Elena's intelligence training had taught her to see patterns he might miss. Still, something in Fareed's voice, the exhaustion, the guilt that mirrored his own, felt impossible to fake. His secure phone buzzed. Jake Morrison. What did you find? Marcus answered. Nothing. Jake's voice carried the frustration of a man accustomed to getting answers. And I mean nothing, Colonel. Sarah Chen doesn't exist in any database I can access. No ICE personnel records, no federal employment history, no goddamn footprint anywhere. Elena stopped pacing, her attention snapping to the phone. That's impossible, Marcus said. She had credentials, backup agents. The credentials could be forgeries. The backup could be contractors or private military. Jake paused. But here's what's really interesting. I called my contact at ICE Phoenix, guy I served with in Ramadi. He's never heard of any operation targeting veteran advocacy groups. No raid scheduled, no fraud investigations in your area. The phantom pain in Marcus's legs flared again, but this time he welcomed it. Pain meant his nervous system was trying to tell him something important. Run, hide, fight. The same signals that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. She's not ICE, he said. Doesn't look like it. Question is, who the hell is she? Marcus ended the call and found Elena watching him with an expression he'd learned to recognize. She was running scenarios, calculating risks, preparing for the kind of quick decision-making that had kept intelligence officers alive in hostile territory. We call the FBI, she said. Report the impersonation. Hand over the recordings. Let them... No. The word came out sharper than he'd intended. If Chen isn't ICE, that means she's operating with resources that let her fake federal credentials and run surveillance operations. You think the FBI doesn't have people on her payroll? Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. They both knew how deep corruption could run in federal agencies, how easy it was to compromise people with access to sensitive information. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a shrinking box. Marcus realized he'd been holding his breath and forced himself to exhale slowly, using the breathing techniques Dr. Patel had taught him for managing anxiety attacks. But this wasn't anxiety, this was recognition. The same feeling he'd had during those final weeks in Iraq, when the pattern of attacks had shifted, and he'd known, without being able to prove it, that someone on the inside was feeding information to insurgents. The sensation of being hunted by an enemy who understood his movements better than he did. "She wants something from me," he said quietly. "The files were just an excuse to make contact, to see how I'd react. The real question is what she's planning." Elena sat back down, pulling her laptop from its bag with mechanical precision. "Then we need to figure out who she really is before midnight. Because whether that phone call was real or fake, she's going to expect you at that warehouse." Marcus watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, pulling up databases and search engines with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years hunting information in hostile territory. Elena had never told him exactly what she'd done during her Army intelligence stint, but moments like this made it clear she'd been very good at it. "Marcus." Her voice carried a note of warning that made him look up from his own laptop. "That warehouse address Fareed gave you? Industrial Road 47? What about it?" "It doesn't exist." Elena turned her screen toward him, showing a map of Phoenix's warehouse district. Industrial Road runs from 12th to 38th. Road 47 would be about 3 miles into empty desert. The phantom pain exploded through Marcus's nervous system like white phosphorus, and this time he couldn't suppress the gasp that escaped his lips. Elena was beside his wheelchair instantly, her hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt the contact, because now he understood. Chen wasn't just using Fareed to set a trap. She was using Marcus's own guilt as bait, counting on his need for redemption to override his survival instincts. And despite knowing it was a trap, despite every logical argument against it, he could already feel himself planning the route to that non-existent address. Some ghosts, he realized, were worth dying for. "No." Elena's hand tightened on Marcus's shoulder as she read the intention in his face. "Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." Marcus pulled away from her touch, rolling his wheelchair back from the desk. The movement sent fresh spikes through his phantom limbs, his body's way of reminding him that some wounds never truly healed. "She has him, Elena. Whether the call was real or coerced, Fareed is alive and she's using him. You don't know that. You're making assumptions based on guilt that's 15 years old." The words hit like a slap, mostly because they were true. Marcus had been carrying the weight of the al-Masri family's deaths since the day he'd identified those burned bodies in that Baghdad morgue. The guilt had shaped every decision since. His advocacy work, his refusal to turn away desperate veterans, his need to save everyone he couldn't save then. "Tell me about the families," Elena said quietly, settling back into her chair. "The ones Chen was trafficking. You never talked about specifics." Marcus's hands stilled on his wheelchair grips. He'd spent years avoiding those details, burying them under layers of bureaucratic language and clinical detachment. But Elena's question cut straight to the infected wound he'd been protecting. 17 families, he said finally. Over 8 months. All interpreters or contractors who'd worked with coalition forces. His voice caught. All people I'd personally recommended for refugee status. Elena went very still. "What do you mean, recommended?" "Part of my job was vetting interpreters for the State Department's Special Immigrant Visa Program. The families who were killed, every single one was someone I'd vouched for." The words tasted like ash. "I thought it was coincidence. Bad luck. Iraq was chaos. People died every day. But it wasn't random. Elena's intelligence training was connecting dots he'd been too traumatized to see. Chen was using your recommendations as a target list." The phantom pain exploded through Marcus's nervous system with such intensity that his vision grayed at the edges. 15 years of carefully constructed understanding crumbled in seconds. He hadn't failed to save those families. He'd marked them for death with his own signature. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I killed them all. Elena leaned forward, her voice urgent. Marcus, no. You couldn't have known. I should have seen the pattern. His hands shook as he pulled up files on his laptop, documents he'd avoided reviewing for over a decade. Look at the dates. Every family died within 2 weeks of my recommendation being submitted. Every single one. The screen filled with names, dates, case numbers. 17 families reduced to administrative entries in a database. But Marcus remembered faces, Ahmed's pride when describing his daughter's acceptance to university, Layla Al-Masri teaching his medic basic Arabic, while her youngest daughter played with spare medical supplies, Hassan's careful questions about American schools and whether his son would be safe there, all dead because Marcus Rivera thought he was helping them. She cultivated me, he said, understanding finally crystallizing. Chen made sure she was assigned to vet the same interpreters I was recommending. She had access to all my files, my personal notes about their families, their plans. Elena's face had gone pale. The explosion that took your legs. 3 days after I told Fareed his family's visa had been approved, Marcus felt pieces clicking into place like the mechanism of an IED. I was supposed to die in that blast. Fareed was supposed to die with his family. But I survived, and Chen needed me to believe he was dead to close the loop. The office felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of children who'd trusted American promises and parents who'd believed in American protection. Marcus had spent 15 years trying to save veterans the system had abandoned, never realizing he'd been the system that abandoned innocent families to slaughter. His secure phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Answer it, Elena said, but Marcus was already swiping to accept. Colonel Rivera. Chen's voice poured from the speaker like poison. I trust you've had time to process your conversation with our mutual friend. What do you want? Marcus's voice came out steady, though his hands trembled. What I've always wanted. Your cooperation. You see, your friend Fareed has been very helpful over the years, but he's become unreliable. Guilt makes people unpredictable. He started to think he can find redemption by exposing our arrangement. There is no arrangement. Chen's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Oh, but there is. There has been for 15 years. Every veteran you've helped get benefits, every disability claim you've pushed through the system, you've been providing me with a beautiful cover story and a ready supply of desperate people who'll do anything to protect what they've finally gained. The room spun around Marcus as understanding hit him. His advocacy work, his success rate, his reputation, all of it built on a foundation of Chen's manipulation. You've been using my clients, he breathed. The disabled ones make excellent couriers. Who questions a veteran in a wheelchair crossing borders? The PTSD cases are wonderfully compliant when properly motivated, and the desperate ones... Chen's voice carried satisfaction that made Marcus's skin crawl. Well, they'll do almost anything to keep their benefits. Elena grabbed her laptop, frantically typing, but Marcus knew it was too late. Chen had been planning this conversation for years, maybe decades. Every move calculated, every word designed to maximize damage. Midnight, Colonel. The warehouse address your friend gave you. Come alone, or I'll make sure every veteran you've helped becomes a target in a very public fraud investigation. Imagine how many will lose everything when their cases are reopened with less sympathetic reviewers. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his reflection in the black phone screen, seeing not a decorated Marine or a dedicated advocate, but a weapon that had been aimed at innocent people for 15 years without his knowledge. Elena was still typing, probably running searches, building dossiers, doing all the things intelligence officers did when the world shifted beneath their feet. But Marcus knew that no amount of information would change the fundamental truth Chen had just revealed. He wasn't the hero of this story. He'd never been the hero. He was the monster who'd been too blind to see the blood on his own hands. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elena's fingers had stopped moving on the keyboard, and Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears like artillery fire in the distance. The weight of Chen's words settled over him like fallout, invisible, poisonous, contaminating everything they touched. She's lying. Elena's voice cut through the quiet, but Marcus heard the uncertainty beneath her conviction. Marcus, she's trying to break you psychologically. Classic interrogation technique. Make the subject complicit in... Stop. Marcus held up a hand, and Elena fell silent. He was thinking, processing, his mind working through the implications with the same methodical precision he'd once used to analyze battlefield intelligence. What if she's not lying? Elena opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus continued. Think about it. My success rate with the VA, 93% approval on disability claims. That's not just good, Elena. That's statistically impossible unless someone was smoothing the path. The words felt like glass in his throat. I thought I was just better at navigating the system, but what if the system was rigged in my favor? Why would she help you win cases? Because every veteran I helped became a potential asset. Think about it. Disabled vets with benefits to protect, PTSD cases isolated from support systems, people so grateful for what they finally received that they'd do anything to keep it. Marcus ran his hands over his face, feeling stubble that reminded him he hadn't slept properly in weeks. She wasn't helping me, she was farming them. Elena's laptop chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted from confusion to something approaching horror. Marcus, you need to see this. She turned the laptop toward him. The screen displayed a VA database query showing claim histories for Marcus's clients over the past 5 years. But these weren't the neat summaries he was used to seeing. This was raw data, approval codes, reviewer assignments, processing timelines. Every single successful claim had been processed by the same 3 reviewers. Claims that should have taken months had been approved in days. Medical evidence that was borderline had been accepted without question. Appeals that normally failed had been rubber-stamped through the system. Jesus, Marcus breathed. It gets worse. Elena pulled up another window. Those 3 reviewers? They all started working for the VA within 6 months of your discharge from the Marines. And look at this, she highlighted a series of dates. Every time you took on a new client, their case was automatically assigned to one of these 3 people. Marcus felt his worldview completing its collapse. Not just Chen, the entire system he'd trusted, the bureaucracy he'd learned to navigate, the small victories he'd celebrated with desperate veterans who finally got the help they deserved. All of it orchestrated. How many? He asked quietly. Elena scrolled through the data. Based on the patterns here, maybe 400 veterans over 15 years, all approved through the same compromised channels. 400 people. 400 desperate, broken warriors who thought Marcus Rivera was their advocate, their champion, their last hope for justice, and all of them unknowingly inducted into Chen's network of assets and victims. They trusted me. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Carmen trusted me. Johnson, Patterson, all of them. They came to me because they thought I could help them fight the system, and instead I delivered them straight into... His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Time you knew the whole truth. F. Marcus hesitated, then opened his email app. A new message sat at the top of his inbox. Sender address just a string of numbers. No subject line. He clicked it open. The message contained a single video file. Marcus glanced at Elena, who nodded grimly, and hit play. The video was grainy, clearly shot from a hidden camera, but the audio was crystal clear. Chen's voice filled the small office, and Marcus recognized the setting. A generic government conference room somewhere in Phoenix. The Rivera operation has been our most successful recruitment tool, Chen was saying to someone off camera. His reputation draws in exactly the demographic we need. Damaged, isolated, grateful for any help. Once they're in the system and receiving benefits, they'll do almost anything to protect their status. And Rivera himself? The second voice was male, accent vaguely European. Still useful as an unknowing recruiter. His guilt over the Iraq situation makes him wonderfully compliant. He genuinely believes he's helping these people, which makes his recommendations that much more convincing. The male voice spoke again. What about long-term sustainability? Eventually someone will notice the patterns. Chen's laugh was cold as winter steel. Let them notice. Rivera's signature is on every single recommendation. His meetings with every asset are documented. When this operation finally comes to light, he'll make a perfect fall guy. Decorated war hero turned corrupt advocate, exploiting the very veterans he pretended to help. The video ended. Marcus stared at the black screen, understanding finally crystallizing with terrible clarity. Chen hadn't just been using him for 15 years, she'd been positioning him as the ultimate scapegoat. Every good deed, every successful case, every grateful veteran, was another piece of evidence in a frame job 15 years in the making. She never intended to let me walk away from this, he said. I was always meant to take the fall. Elena was already reaching for her secure phone, but Marcus grabbed her wrist. Don't, he said. Not yet. Because now Marcus understood something Chen had missed in all her careful planning. She thought his guilt and his need for redemption made him controllable, but she'd made one crucial error in judgment. She'd forgotten that Marcus Rivera was still a Marine, and Marines didn't abandon their own. Elena stared at him, her hand frozen halfway to her phone. Marcus, what are you thinking? She expects me broken. Marcus released Elena's wrist and rolled back from the desk, his mind already shifting into operational mode. 15 years of psychological manipulation, and she thinks she's finally cornered me. But Chen made one mistake. She told me about the 400. That's not a mistake. That's leverage. Elena's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd seen too many good soldiers make fatal decisions based on guilt and honor. She's counting on you trying to save them. It's what she's always counted on. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces in the database Elena had pulled up. Carmen Vasquez, who'd lost her hearing to an IED blast and spent 3 years fighting for benefits before Marcus helped her case through the system. James Patterson, whose PTSD claim had been denied twice before Marcus found the right reviewer. Sarah Kim, a medic whose exposure to burn pits had left her with chronic respiratory issues that the VA initially refused to acknowledge. All of them trusting him, all of them unknowingly compromised. Elena, I need you to contact your old unit. Marcus's voice was steady now, the tremor of guilt replaced by something harder. Tell them we have actionable intelligence on a human trafficking operation with federal law enforcement involvement. Marcus, and I need you to pull every file we have on Chen. Real name, service record, anything that doesn't fit the ICE agent cover story. He turned his wheelchair to face her fully. Because agents don't run 15-year operations without serious backing. This isn't just corruption, it's something bigger. Elena hesitated, then pulled out her secure phone. What about the warehouse meeting? I'm going. Like hell you are. Elena's military training kicked in, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to talking subordinates out of suicide missions. It's obviously a trap. Chen wants you isolated and vulnerable so she can tie up loose ends. Of course it's a trap. Marcus pulled up the map of Industrial Road again, studying the terrain beyond the legitimate warehouse district. 3 miles of desert, scattered buildings, plenty of places for vehicles to approach unseen. But it's also an opportunity. For what? To get yourself killed? Marcus met her eyes. To get Fareed out. The words hung between them like a challenge. Elena's expression shifted through several emotions. Disbelief, anger, and finally a grudging recognition that she'd seen before in soldiers who'd made peace with necessary risks. You don't even know if he's really alive, she said quietly. The video proves he is. Chen's too smart to fake something that detailed if she didn't need the genuine cooperation. Marcus's fingers drummed against his wheelchair armrest, a nervous habit from his active duty days. But more than that, Fareed sent me that video. He's trying to warn me, which means he's looking for a way out. Elena was quiet for several minutes, fingers flying over her keyboard. Finally, she turned the screen toward him again. This time it showed satellite imagery of the Industrial Road area, updated within the last 24 hours. If you're determined to do this, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone crossing a line she couldn't uncross, then we do it right. No heroic charges into the desert. No Marine Corps martyrdom complex. Marcus studied the imagery. The desert beyond Industrial Road 38 was dotted with abandoned construction sites, failed developments, and temporary structures. About 3 miles out, where Industrial Road 47 would theoretically be located, a cluster of prefab buildings sat in a rough compound configuration. There, Elena pointed to the compound. Recent construction, according to county records, filed 6 months ago under a shell company. Generator-powered, off-grid, perfect for temporary operations, or for holding people who need to disappear, Marcus added grimly. Elena pulled up another window. Traffic cameras along Industrial Road showed the same dark SUV that had been following Marcus earlier, making multiple trips along the route over the past week. She's been preparing this for a while, Elena observed, which means tonight isn't just about eliminating you and Fareed. She's planning something bigger. Marcus's phantom pain spiked suddenly, the familiar fire racing through nerves that no longer existed. But this time, instead of the usual wave of helplessness, the pain brought clarity. Chen had been manipulating him for 15 years, using his guilt and his need for redemption as weapons against him. But guilt, Marcus realized, could cut both ways. Elena, how long to get a response from your contacts? For intelligence sharing, maybe an hour. For tactical support, she checked her watch. 4 hours minimum. It was 8:47 p.m. The warehouse meeting was at midnight. Then we have time for one more conversation. Marcus reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Carmen Vasquez answered on the second ring. Colonel Rivera, it's kind of late. Carmen, I need you to do something for me, Marcus said, and I need you to trust me one more time. Because if Chen wanted to use his network against him, Marcus was going to remind her that networks could be turned in both directions, and submarines never stop fighting for their own. Carmen, I need you to listen carefully, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to ask. In about 20 minutes, you're going to get a call from someone claiming to be from ICE, telling you that your disability benefits are under investigation. I need you to not answer that call. Silence stretched across the line before Carmen's voice came back, sharp with confusion. Colonel, what's going on? Is this about that agent who came to see you? Marcus glanced at Elena, who was already pulling up contact information for the other veterans on Chen's list. Carmen, how much do you trust me? You got me my hearing when the VA said my claim was hopeless. You literally changed my life, so completely. Then I need you to call everyone in our support group. Tell them to turn off their phones until tomorrow morning. Tell them it's a security exercise, tell them anything, but get them off the grid for the next 6 hours. Colonel, you're scaring me. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing Carmen's face from their last meeting, the relief when her benefits had finally come through, the gratitude that had nearly brought her to tears. All of it built on Chen's manipulation. Carmen, I made a mistake 15 years ago, a big one, and tonight I'm going to fix it, but I need to know that you and the others are safe while I do. After Carmen agreed and hung up, Elena looked up from her laptop. Text messages going out on multiple networks, she reported. Chen's people are starting to activate pressure points across your entire client base. Phone calls, unscheduled home visits, official-looking documents demanding immediate responses. How many are Most of them. Marcus, these people are terrified of losing their benefits. They don't understand they're walking into... They understand exactly what they need to understand. Marcus cut her off. They understand that the system failed them once, and they can't afford to let it fail them again. Elena's secure phone buzzed. She answered on speaker. We have eyes on the compound, a crisp male voice reported. Multiple heat signatures, at least 12 individuals. Heavy vehicle presence, 2 helicopters on standby. This is bigger than a simple meet. Evacuation operation, Marcus said immediately. Chen's shutting down the Phoenix network tonight. Fareed and I were supposed to be the loose ends, but she's moving the entire operation. Elena processed this. If we wait for tactical support, those people get moved to a new location and we lose them forever. Marcus was already reaching for his jacket. How long since Fareed sent that video? Timestamp shows 47 minutes ago, which meant Fareed had been planning this moment of truth just as carefully as Chen had been planning their destruction. Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the battlefield awareness that used to keep him alive in Fallujah. All the pieces moving toward collision, and somewhere in that chaos, an opportunity for decisive action. His phone rang. Unknown number again. Agent Chen, Marcus answered. Colonel Rivera. I trust your evening has been educational. I've learned a few things, yes. Then you understand the stakes. You have 90 minutes to reach the warehouse. Come alone, or I start making phone calls that will destroy everything your veteran friends have built for themselves. I understand the stakes better than you think, Marcus said, and for the first time in their conversation, Chen was quiet. I understand that you've been running this operation for 15 years. I understand that you've used my guilt and my client's desperation to build a human trafficking network. And I understand that tonight you're planning to eliminate the evidence and start over somewhere new. You understand nothing. But there was something different in Chen's voice now, surprise maybe, or the first edge of uncertainty. I understand that Fareed sent me that video because he's tired of living with what you made him do. I understand that your operation depends on keeping people isolated and afraid. And I understand that you forgot something important about Marines, Agent Chen, which is... Marcus looked at Elena, who had gone still, her eyes fixed on his face. In her expression, he could see the recognition of a moment balanced on a knife's edge, where everything that came after would be determined by what happened in the next few seconds. We don't abandon our own, Marcus said. Not the living ones, and not the dead ones. Fareed was my responsibility 15 years ago, and he's still my responsibility now. Those 400 veterans you compromised, they're my responsibility too. Chen's laugh was sharp with returning confidence. Responsibility? Colonel, you're a crippled old man with a lawsuit hanging over your head and a dead career behind you. What exactly do you think you can do? Marcus smiled, and Elena later said it was the most dangerous expression she'd ever seen on a human face. I think, Marcus said, I'm about to remind you why they gave me a silver star. The tactical team found them 3 hours later. Marcus sat in his wheelchair beside the overturned SUV, his hands zip-tied behind his back, blood streaming from a cut above his left eye. Fareed knelt in the desert sand 20 feet away, guarded by 2 men who would later be identified as Chen's primary enforcers. Between them, Agent Sarah Chen lay motionless, her service weapon 15 feet from her outstretched hand. Sir, are you injured? The team leader's voice crackled through his radio as medics rushed forward. I'm fine, Marcus said, though his voice carried the exhaustion of someone who just lived through his worst nightmare and his greatest redemption in the same hour. Check the compound first. Fareed says there are 11 people inside who need medical attention. Elena arrived with the second wave of vehicles, her face grim as she surveyed the scene. The compound Fareed had described sat dark against the desert horizon, its prefab buildings already swarming with federal agents. Emergency vehicles lined Industrial Road like Christmas lights against the black sky. What happened? Elena asked, kneeling beside Marcus's wheelchair as a medic cleaned the cut on his forehead. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching as Fareed was led toward an ambulance. His old translator moved like a man carrying invisible weight, each step deliberate and careful. When their eyes met across the desert staging area, Fareed offered something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't surrender either. He saved my life, Marcus said finally. 15 years too late, but he saved my life. The full story would take weeks to piece together through testimony and evidence recovery. Chen's network had moved nearly 800 people through Phoenix over 15 years, some willing, most not, all of them processed through a system designed to make vulnerable individuals disappear into bureaucratic cracks. The 400 veterans had been unwitting cover, their legitimate cases providing the perfect camouflage for fraudulent documentation. Fareed had been reporting to Chen since 2009, feeding her information about refugee networks and immigration patterns. But he'd also been documenting everything: names, dates, locations, financial transfers. The video he'd sent Marcus was part of a digital archive spanning 6 years, evidence he'd collected while waiting for someone with enough credibility and stubbornness to bring down the entire operation. You could have contacted me years ago, Marcus said during Fareed's debriefing 3 days later. They sat in a VA conference room that Elena had secured, the morning Phoenix sun streaming through windows that looked out over the city Marcus had spent 15 years trying to serve. And tell you what, Fareed's English was still accented but confident, shaped by years of necessity rather than formal education. That I was alive? That your government saved me from Iraq only to make me complicit in something worse? You carried enough guilt, my friend. Marcus studied Fareed's face, seeing traces of the young man who'd guided his unit through Fallujah's maze of streets and loyalties. But there were lines now, shadows around his eyes that spoke of choices no translator should have been forced to make. Chen said your family was killed because of bureaucratic delays. Chen said many things that were convenient for Chen. Fareed's voice carried a weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. My family died because someone needed me desperate and grateful and completely dependent on the system that saved me. Fear is a more reliable motivator than money, Colonel. The lawsuit disappeared with Chen's arrest, dissolved into the larger federal investigation that would eventually touch 3 states and multiple agencies. Marcus's veterans were cleared of any wrongdoing, their benefits secure and legitimate despite the compromised channels that had processed them. Carmen Vasquez sent him a card that simply read, "Thank you for keeping your promise." But the victories felt smaller than Marcus had expected, overshadowed by the weight of understanding how completely he'd been used. Sitting in his office 6 weeks later, watching Elena pack files into boxes marked for the federal prosecutors, he realized that Chen had been wrong about one crucial thing. His guilt hadn't made him controllable. It had made him dangerous. "So what's next?" Elena asked, sealing the last box with tape that would become evidence in trials still months away. Marcus looked out his window at the Phoenix skyline, the same view he'd stared at during 15 years of small victories and bureaucratic battles. The city looked different now, familiar but somehow larger, as if he'd been seeing only part of it before. "Fareed wants to work with refugee resettlement," Marcus said. "He thinks his experience gives him insight into how these systems can be corrupted." Asked if I wanted to partner with him, Elena nodded slowly. "And do you?" Marcus Rivera, former Marine colonel, former VA advocate, survivor of Agent Sarah Chen's 15-year manipulation, thought about promises made in war zones and responsibilities that transcend mistakes in time. "I think," he said, "it's time I learned how to save people the right way." Outside his window, Phoenix stretched toward mountains that had watched this desert for centuries before any of them arrived. The city would keep growing, keep changing, keep drawing people who needed second chances and new beginnings. And somewhere in that vast expanse of possibility, Marcus Rivera was finally ready to let his past inform his future without defining it.